Imagine a house that is not a home, but a monument to a man who is still alive, yet already a ghost. It is 3 a.m. at Graceland. The air is heavy with the smell of expensive cologne and old fried food. The corridors are empty, but the lights stay on because the king is afraid of the dark. He has 1 billion fans, but tonight, not one of them can reach him. He is the most famous human being on the planet, a man whose voice defined a century, and whose face became a global icon. Yet in this very moment, he is sitting alone in a marble bathroom, staring at a mirror that no longer reflects the young rebel from Memphis. At just 42 years old, the world's greatest entertainer is about to take his final breath in total isolation. How did the brightest star in the history of music become a prisoner in his own palace? How did a boy who had nothing, then gained everything, end up with less than when he started? This isn't just a story about rock and roll. It is a psychological descent into the shadows of greatness. It is the story of how America's biggest dream became its most tragic nightmare. We often look at the crown and the jumpsuits, but we forget the man shivering underneath them. Tonight, we step behind the velvet curtains of the king's final days to answer the one question that has haunted his fans for decades. Why did the king have to die alone? The narrative begins in the dust of Tupelo, Mississippi. Elvis Presley was born into a world of crushing poverty, a 2-room shack where the wind whistled through the cracks in the walls. His father, Vernon, was a man who struggled to keep a job, once spending time in prison for altering a check. This was a family that survived on welfare and the kindness of neighbors. For his 11th birthday, young Elvis didn't dream of fame or a crown. He wanted a rifle, a symbol of manhood and survival in the rural South. But his mother, Gladys, the center of his universe, was terrified of violence. She took him to the Tupelo hardware store and, instead of a gun, she bought him a '75 acoustic guitar. It was a choice that would inadvertently dismantle the old world and build a new one. When Elvis first stepped onto the stage at Sun Records, he didn't just sing, he released a cultural earthquake. He possessed a raw, dangerous energy that bridged the gap between black blues and white country music, something the segregated America of the 1950s had never seen. He was a lightning bolt in a bottle. As he swiveled his hips and growled into the microphone, the youth of the world found their leader, and the establishment found their greatest fear. But even then, in the middle of the screaming crowds and the flashing bulbs, a shadow was beginning to form. The humble boy who just wanted to buy his mother a house was being swallowed by the myth he was creating. The dirt road was behind him, but the road ahead was paved with a luxury that would eventually become his suffocating cocoon. He was no longer just Elvis. He was a product, a symbol, and a target for those who saw him as a ticket to a world he could never truly belong to. The king was a puppet, and the strings were made of pure gold. No story of Elvis is complete without the man who held the leash, Colonel Tom Parker, a former carnival barker with no soul and a mysterious past. Parker saw Elvis not as an artist, but as a commodity. He was a master of manipulation who took a staggering 50% of everything Elvis earned, a rate unheard of in the industry. But the true tragedy wasn't just the money, it was the psychological cage Parker built. For decades, the world begged for an international tour. Fans in London, Tokyo, and Paris waited for the king to arrive. But he never came. Why? Because the colonel was actually an illegal immigrant from the Netherlands with no passport. If he left the United States, he could never return. To protect his own secret, he kept the king trapped within the borders of America, forcing him into soul-crushing movie contracts and an endless, exhausting residency in Las Vegas. Elvis wanted to make great art. Parker wanted him to sell souvenirs. While Elvis was pouring his soul into his music, Parker was busy signing deals for Elvis-themed lipstick and teddy bears. The king was exhausted, performing 2 shows a night, living on a treadmill of uppers to get him on stage and downers to help him sleep. He was a prisoner of his own success, unable to make a single decision without the colonel's approval. The man who changed the world's culture couldn't even choose his own songs. This was the ultimate betrayal of the American dream. A man who possessed the power to move millions was powerless to move himself out of the shadow of his manager. Parker didn't care if the king was happy, he only cared if the king was profitable. And as long as the money kept flowing, the colonel kept pulling the strings tighter and tighter until the man underneath started to break. As the world outside became a blur, Graceland became his fortress and his cell. In his final years, Elvis retreated into a surreal, nocturnal existence. He lived like a phantom, waking up at sunset and retreating to bed as the first rays of light hit the Memphis sky. He was terrified of the public eye, yet he couldn't stand to be alone. He surrounded himself with the Memphis Mafia, a circle of bodyguards and friends who were paid to never say no. Inside the walls of his mansion, his behavior became increasingly erratic and desperate. He would spend thousands of dollars on a whim, once flying his private jet across the country just to buy a specific sandwich. He would shoot out television sets with his revolvers when he didn't like what was on screen. His diet became a form of slow-motion suicide. He consumed upwards of 10,000 calories a day, gorging on fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches until his body was unrecognizable. The young, vibrant rebel was gone, replaced by a bloated, tired man who was heavily medicated just to function. He spent hours in his jungle room, a space filled with fake waterfalls and green shag carpet, trying to find peace in a world that refused to let him rest. He was lonely in a house full of people. He gave away Cadillacs to strangers, desperately trying to buy a moment of genuine human connection. But everyone he met wanted something from him. He was a god to his fans, but a ghost to himself. The medicine cabinet became his only true confidant, a cocktail of pills that numbed the pain of a life that had become a performance he could no longer finish. He was trapped in a golden loop of fame, pills, and isolation, waiting for a curtain call that would never come. On August 16, 1977, the lights at Graceland finally went out. The world went into a state of shock, a collective mourning for a man they felt they knew. But they didn't know Elvis. They knew the image. His death was a tragic punctuation mark on a life that had become too heavy to carry. Elvis Presley proved that you can conquer the world, build the grandest palace, and have 1 billion people chant your name and still lose the only thing that truly matters, your soul. He was a titan of industry, a king of culture, and a victim of his own legend. As we look back at the shadows he left behind, we see a warning for every generation. Greatness is a beautiful thing, but without a foundation of truth and freedom, it is nothing more than a well-decorated cage. The king is dead, but his story remains a haunting reminder that the most expensive things in life are the ones that cost us our peace. Pause. Was it the fame that killed him, or the people who wouldn't let him be human? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching Shadows of Greatness. Subscribe to step deeper into the history they never told you in school.